Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. This week, we wanted to dive right into how people are probably destroying their budgets in their 20s. I know I very much did this in my early 20s in terms of like not knowing what to not spend on, what to save on, what to splurge on, and doing things that other people in their 20s normally do that, in my opinion, do wreck your budget a little bit. And a budget can be wrecked without you even knowing you have a budget, in my opinion. um, but yeah, I wanted to dive right into this topic. I feel like in our early 20s, you and I, Farah, had like quite different relationships with money. I feel like we're like on the opposite spectrums, but like similar mindsets have like almost, is converged the right word now? Um, but yeah, I wanted to start with the main thing that I think ruins a lot of early 20s budgeting is trying to keep up with people around you in your life. And I think this is slightly different to when you do have a bit more money and you kind of enter lifestyle inflation, which is when your kind of like costs and spending and your general like money and financial habits tend to go up the more you earn. This is more related to actually blindly maybe spending in the way that you see other people spending around you. And this could be from things like, for me, for example, I did this a lot by shopping to try and like look like on trend. I was actually talking to Sam about this earlier this week in terms of like, I really regret how much I used money to not only keep up with people around me, but to try and like gain their approval by like looking like them and doing the same things that they did, thinking that like if I did that, I would be liked and accepted and like included in all of these things. And I think that's a real budget killer because it reflects on like a real lack of like, okay, I don't really know who I am, but I know I just don't want to be rejected. Did you ever experience that, or did you see that happening a lot around you when you were in your early 20s?
Do you know what? I think I went through this earlier than my 20s, thinking about it.
Really?
Yeah, I want to say around like sixth form age. I think it's probably because that's the first time I started working. Obviously, it wasn't full time work, but I got my first part time job. I actually had money that I was earning for the first time. And I think I very, very quickly, I think when you do grow up with a lack of money, you automatically, when you get it as a kid and as someone that's like, I don't know, a people pleaser as well on top, you want the first thing you think of is, oh, I can now use this to impress people. And, like now suddenly dress differently or just show that, I don't know, try and make yourself more interesting using your money. So I think I went through that in around my sixth form time because that's when I had my part-time jobs and I didn't really have a lot of money from those jobs, so I would save up and then I would like buy new clothes or for every occasion. There was one point where I wanted to buy like a new top or outfit for every occasion, and I can't lie, most girls do that now anyways. That's like a very normal thing, but back then I did it because I don't know, it was like kind of keeping up appearances. So I feel like I did that quite young, but then I got told off for it when I did that, and then I think I automatically just had a bit of
Wait, you were actually told off?
yeah.
Oh, damn.
Well, I just remember one time I I bought a new top for my own birthday, which was fine because it was my birthday. But then I also then my friend's birthday was like the next month or something, so I bought a new top for that. Bear in mind, this is not like designer items I'm buying. Like I couldn't afford stuff like that. It was literally like a top shop top, like a 30 quid top. But like growing up, we really didn't have a lot. So like I would never, like even buying from there was considered expensive back then.
Mm-hmm.
But was earning my own money. So I thought, you know what? Like I'm working hard for it. If this is how I want to use it, it's not harming anyone. But yeah, my parents found the extra top that I bought like a month later and were absolutely fuming about it. Like, and I just had this massive lecture about how I was wasting money and I'm financially irresponsible. And yeah, it was just like they came really like down really hard on me, and I think that scarred me a little bit, because I was like, after that I was like really stressed about the idea of like, I don't know, losing money is the right word or phrase, but I would just panic about spending stuff.
Yeah.
I think that's maybe when I then started to just be really, and maybe it was a good thing in a way, like I don't know if I would have continued spending, you know, like spending more and more money, and then, you know, like racking up debts and things. Like I don't know what I would have done after that. I don't think I wasn't that irresponsible even then. I was just buying an extra top, so it wasn't that dramatic, but it was made that dramatic, which is why I think in my 20s I became a very like frugal, very like just like stressed about money, I guess, and like spending it on myself as well, because I guess because of that experience, to be honest. So yeah, I kind of went through that before 20, and then when I got to 20, but then I'd also already been through a lot of experiences where I was always like less than or not as cool as, because other people had more money. So I feel like because growing up like that, like I was always around kids that had so much money, and I just didn't have the same things as them. Like they always had like new stuff. So I think by the time I got to my 20s, I'd it was almost like, what's the point in trying to impress when I've already gone through not being able to do that? I don't know. I feel like some people might do that opposite of that and be like, oh, now's my time to shine. But I think I did. I don't know, my brain, and probably because of those experiences where I did try and like spend on myself, and then I got shot down very, very quickly. It was probably that, coupled with the fact that I'd had so many experiences of like not being able to keep up appearances anyway, and just kind of like accepting that in a way.
Yeah. So it didn't kind of like impact your budget too much as you got into your early 20s.
I think when I got into my early 20s, because I had such like bigger goals other than, you know, like day-to-day spending or like how I was going to look and stuff, I was going for property like very much as soon as I entered my 20s.
Yeah.
So I already kind of had it in my head that because I had such a big monetary goal that was going to take so long in my head, I couldn't really afford to like spend on other like menial things, or
Yeah.
feel I didn't want to feel like I was wasting money elsewhere.
Yeah. You were super focused.
Yeah, I had that big goal. So that's why I think it's so important, if you do get like sucked into traps, like, you know, just wasting money for the sake of like impressing people, you need to have these like goals that you have for yourself financially to also help steer you away from doing that. Because when you do have bigger goals and you know it's going to take longer, but it's something that you really want to achieve, you will do what you can to like cut back on other things to make sure you achieve it quicker. And then you'll also end up in a position where you save yourself a lot of headache with like wasting money and like doing all these things to impress people or like keep up with the people around you, because your focus isn't even there. Your focus is in a completely different place. And I think that's where mine was.
Yeah. I think it relates really nicely to a concept I've kind of discovered over the last few years of like using your money and your expenditure as like a way to vote for the things that you like vote for your values. And the way I like to look at it is that for me, especially in my early 20s, because I had such a kind of lack of purpose, and I also came from like quite a lack mindset, I was trying to like vote for anything. I was trying to just like vote as much as I could to figure out, okay, well, is this going to work? Is that going to work? Thinking that I was just going to eventually earn more, or like eventually I'll be fine. And I think you had this really, because you had like such a focus or this goal of getting your property, you were like, well, I want my votes to count, so I'm not going to waste any votes unless they're related to my ability to save up for this property, or like cut my expenses down so I have more votes, i.e. money, for being able to put away like money into a deposit or something like that, you know? So I think if you like, I think looking at like your money like they are votes for things that you want is a nice way to think about like, okay, well, if I vote with my money, then I have to vote for something. So then what am I going to vote for in my early 20s? And I think that's a really good sign to try and figure out, well, what are your values in your early 20s? Like what you don't need, like it's, if you know you want to buy property, I think that's really good because then great, you have that focus and you can then start voting. But if you actually have no idea what you want to do, especially in this day and age, I feel like when we were in our early 20s, it was so easy to kind of decide, well, I could get on the property ladder, or I could go traveling, or I could do this, that, whatever, or get a job, or, you know, like things like that. Whereas now I feel like because careers aren't so, I want to say, like sure anymore, and because options are like limitless to like Gen Z, I don't know what comes. Alpha, yeah, alpha. For those two generations, like I feel like they've got way more options, but also I feel like they're also like further removed from like the ability to actually invest into property as an asset. Like I feel like it's easier for Gen Z and Gen Alpha to like buy businesses and like start businesses and actually work their way up jobs rather than like getting property. It's getting harder and harder. So picking a goal might actually be more difficult for you. So instead of trying to pick something and stick with it and then maybe regretting it later on, I think it's a really good idea to like think about, okay, well, if I want to vote for maybe the kind of person I want to be, and the person I want to be doesn't just buy clothes every time I leave the house so I'm wearing something new, then that could just be your goal for now, to just like be more assured in like how you want to show up and like where you get your validation from. I definitely did a lot of that when I was in my early 20s. I did, and that's what I was complaining to Sam in like a half regretful, half like resentful rant about my older self. Like I used to get new outfits on ASOS next day delivery for like the next week in the office because I was so embarrassed about like my wardrobe, and like I didn't want to like seem, I don't know, uncool and like poor for wearing the same thing all the time when actually it did not matter at all. And I really regret that way of spending. But for me, it was a lesson. It was like, okay, those are the votes I had to make in order to realize I will never vote like that again.
Yeah. I do think you sometimes you have to go through a little bit of like understanding the value of just like being comfortable in yourself. And I feel like you can only look back and realize that from moments that you weren't,
Yeah, for sure.
because you don't have the comparison otherwise.
Yeah. And I think as someone who's like, okay, well, maybe you've realized that, okay, there's certain values and there's things you want to change about yourself. Okay, so let's try and change your spending around it. And you feel tempted to, I don't know, like buy your way into like a better version of yourself. I think that's also a huge like budget killer when you're in your 20s, or actually maybe not your 20s, but like when you're first starting to like discover yourself or like understand yourself. I think when you realize, okay, I want to like, if you take it to a simpler level, like I want to drink more water and I want to walk more. That means I'm going to buy a Stanley Cup and I'm going to get like running trainers, matching sets, everything that all the TikTok girls are wearing, and then start walking more. And I don't know if this is maybe just a controversial opinion for me, but I really think there's value in like building or like proving to yourself the changes you want to make in your life, even on a small scale. Like if you can do something consistently for like a month, then you maybe invest actual money into it. And then that's almost like a way of being like, okay, well, I've done the thing. Now I'm going to vote with my money for being the thing. I think that's a really good way to control the damage you could do in your 20s, especially when it comes to like understanding yourself, your values, and the things you want to do in life. But have you ever done that? Have you ever like bought something expensive or maybe like overpriced, thinking like, okay, this is going to change my life and make me like the ultimate version of myself?
I think so. I feel like that is definitely the way my brain operates in general, which you're making me really reevaluate right now. But I genuinely try. If I want to start something new, if I want to motivate myself to do something, I will usually like get all the equipment or everything right up front, because I'm like, now I'm equipped to do this thing.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah, I never really thought about it the way you just said it. It's like, no, you almost reward yourself for becoming that person by getting all the stuff like as a level up.
Yeah.
which makes sense because you don't always start from the top level in anything you do. Like if you're starting a new habit, like you're always going to have room for growth anyway. So you could almost leverage those like extra fancy like equipment or new workout clothes or whatever it is to like almost encourage you to like become someone that does that thing already and then level up with those extras. But yeah, I always motivate myself to do that thing with
Buy the thing. Yeah.
yeah.
I honestly have done that a lot as well. And I called it on my Instagram a few months ago. I called it like a graveyard of the habits that you tried. And it's like, it is what I've built. Like, especially for example, I've got a lot of like journals, like cool journals. And this is going to sound stupid, but I've bought like nice pens, like expensive pens, thinking that that's all the stuff that's going to make me magically become like a journaling type of person, when really I've literally had like the exact same new journal, new pen that I've just let collect dust. And actually, not to bring in like too much self-improvement-y or like psychological stuff into this episode, but there's actually like a reason why we do that. And most of the time, being able to like buy all the things to set ourselves up, like we're thinking we're setting ourselves up for success by buying all these things to equip ourselves, it's actually just giving us the dopamine hit of becoming that person before actually doing any of the work. And it's like our brain's way of like tricking ourselves that like, oh, you've made progress, you've actually done something towards this goal,
Started yet.
you can take a rest now. When you've not even started yet. So I think like it's kind of like full circle. It's like you can be in a place where you're maybe self-sabotaging, you don't know what to spend money on, you figure out those things, you try to improve yourself, you end up like buying all this stuff to try and improve yourself, and actually you just need to be able to like prove to yourself that you can actually uphold these habits or these new changes in your life. And it doesn't even take that long. You can just do it for like a couple of weeks. Like I'm currently so I've got a Kindle and I've been reading 10 pages a day for the last like almost 2 months as part of this challenge I'm doing. And I really want to get like, it's so dumb, but I really want to get like this gooseneck that you can attach to your bed that holds your Kindle up for you. And this little button thing that you can like attach to your Kindle that like you press the button and it like turns the page. Because I'm getting annoyed having to like hold my Kindle at night. But I only read for 10 pages a day, which for me right now, so I'm reading like self-development books, it takes me like 20 minutes. And in my head, I'm like, you know what? 20 minutes of reading a day is not worth upgrading my reading setup yet. Like I want to be like an avid reader who deserves this like over the top setup in my bedroom before I actually buy those things, because they're quite expensive. It's like £50 on Amazon to get those two things. So that's what I'm doing. Like I'm gonna challenge myself for the next like few weeks. I'm gonna just try and read a few more pages, like really push that consistent time that I'm doing every day. And if I get to the end of the month, for example, and I've done that, I'm gonna buy those things on Amazon and you'll see me post about it on Instagram. But I think it's a good way to like not get caught up in like self-improvement, which a lot of people tend to do in their 20s, and then actually use your money to fuel that as well. Like try and do the habits, do the things, and then reward yourself by investing into those things, and therefore like back into yourself as well.
Yeah. I do feel like tech though is an exception of something that can aid your like goals or your habits and things that you want to implement, because I feel like, you know how we've discussed before in episodes about habit building, one of the core components of being able to make a new habit stick is by making it easily accessible and making it as simple as possible. So like for me, when I've spoken about this before for sure, but you know when I bought my iPad, and that was like such a difficult decision for me because they're so freaking expensive, and I already had a laptop and I already have a phone. I'm like, this is just something in between both of those things, and I can literally use both of the things I already have for what I use the iPad for. But because I'd spent so long deliberating on what I would use the iPad for and like what difference it would make. Even though it was like an investment and a cost to myself in my 20s, I still feel like I've reaped so many rewards. Like I've even started, this is the fact that I started reading so much this year purely because I have the iPad, because I read all my books on there. And the
Do you?
yeah,
Oh my God, how? Like
from
the
the
Kindle app?
books. No, just from the
Oh,
Apple.
on Apple the
Yeah,
books.
I
Oh
just buy
my
all the books on there
God.
and I read them all. And that's like, I've read like 20 books this year. And if like for the past few years, I'd probably read like zero or half a book because I never got through them, because I don't know, I'd always end up like not wanting to read late at night, and then it's dark and then you can't see the pages in a physical book. So I would just always find every excuse to not read or not finish a book. I would start reading a book and I would never ever finish one until this year. And that's when I got the iPad and I started reading all my books on there. And it's so convenient, obviously, because you can, it's literally, it's not pocket size, but it's the equivalent. Like it's so tiny, the one I got. So it's so good to like carry around. Like I get all my work done on there. When I don't want to carry around my laptop, I get all my work done on there because it's obviously bigger than a phone screen. So it's helped so much with me be efficient with work. So I feel like there's definitely things that you can invest on. I think it's just your intention behind like what you need things for or why you're doing something. Like if you're doing something like that because, oh, well, everyone around me's got an iPad and they seem to be getting a lot out of it, and I kind of want this image of someone that's like productive. And I don't know, I feel like if you have that kind of mentality towards buying something, then you know it's not a good investment for you. But if you have the kind of mentality of you're really sure why you need it or want it, you're really sure of the effects it's going to have on your life and your productivity or whatever you want to use it for, then by all means, like invest in that thing. Because I don't know, I just think about things like that because of how long I deliberated on it and how like painful I made the process of buying it, because I was like, oh, it's so much money and do I need it? And do I deserve to like spend that much money on something that I don't know, I was just really scared to like spend money on that. But it's like helped me in so many ways, and I've actually used it for more ways than I even thought I needed it for in the first place. Like the things that I imagined me using it for, like they've completely flipped now, but it's actually still such a useful thing to have.
Yeah.
So,
I think I agree with you in terms of like tech. Tech is always going to help, but I think not overdoing the tech is definitely like the line in
yeah,
between not
there's
reinvesting.
definitely things that are just nice to have, and
Yeah.
like the stand to help prop up your Kindle.
I saw someone do it on TikTok
Maybe
and I
not
was like,
unessential. Yeah, there are definitely things I think that you can help like propel you forward and like help kickstart something or help you be more efficient or productive, or like even if you've got a new business idea and you're starting a new business and you need like a bit of tech to help you do that, then that is a good investment to make because you know what like the long-term goal is and you know what you're using it for. So yeah, I definitely think it's the intention, and I don't want people to be like scared of spending money like I was. Like I think when you get into that rut of like being terrified of spending money on something and like worrying about your budget overly, then you're just in a lack mindset at that point. You're not actually, you don't have a healthy mindset towards money, even if you think you're being careful.
yeah.
So yeah, there's definitely a balance.
Yeah. I think it's definitely that mindset of like, if I spend this, it's never going to come back. But
Yeah.
you have to really see it as like, okay, well, what am I getting back for this purchase? And you've clearly gained like 20 books worth of knowledge is like, how do you put a price on that?
It's huge.
You can't.
It's actually huge.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you can't. And that's a nice segue into what I think is a huge budget killer in your 20s, is focusing on the 20% of your lifestyle and your habits and your budget instead of the 80%. Because like you say, if you're starting a business and there's this one thing that's going to help you maybe be able to get 80% of your tasks done faster, of course that's going to be a great investment, right? And in our 20s, I think for a lot of people listening, when you're younger anyway, the biggest chunk of your spending on a month-to-month basis is gonna be your living, like the actual essential living costs, like rent, utilities, like food, Wi-Fi, those kinds of things, that's going to make up 80% of your spending. And I think the mistake we make when we're young is thinking that like, oh, I need to focus on my shopping habits, or like the Netflix, the latte, the avocado toast, all this kind of, all the niche, the kind of cliches, right? Of like things that are making our budgets go or like get out of control. And while I talk a lot about that, like obviously shopping habits, my shopping habits were bad, but I speak about them in more of in more relation to like a reflection of my mindset towards money and myself. And like, that's how I did not, that's what influenced my relationship with money. It's not the actual habits on paper, like the shopping on paper. That's not the thing that was like, oh, not doing that saved my finances and got me out of my overdraft and all this debt. Actually, what got me out of my overdraft and all the debt I was in was focusing on the big things in my life. Like when we moved into this flat, we had someone living with us to reduce our big contributions, like the essential living expenses. So we were splitting things in 3 ways rather than 2 ways, or rather than me just living by myself, right? And I don't want to brush past the privilege of actually just doing life with a partner, a boyfriend, a girlfriend, because that makes things significantly easier, especially in terms of like rent, bills, utilities, all this kind of thing. But just to focus a bit more on like the topic of what I was saying in terms of like, okay, we actively looked at ways to reduce those big chunks of money, instead of looking at like habits and stuff. And I think that's what we need to focus on in our 20s, is like when you're in your early 20s. And again, this might be another controversial opinion of mine, but I think we're like slightly obsessed with like having to, and this does not apply to me and you, where like we moved out for different reasons than to just like live by ourselves. But I feel like there's a lot of conversation around like, oh, I want to be independent. I want to start like living life. I want to start like facing the real world without having to depend on my parents because that's embarrassing, or that's like no one else is doing that. There's a huge cost to actually just not utilizing either living with your parents or living with friends or living with another roommate or something like that, and going straight into having to live by yourself just because that's the lifestyle you kind of want. Like that's such a huge impact on like those big costs in your early 20s. And I feel like there is like a kind of stubbornness towards like not being willing to just split those costs just for like a few years, because I think the impact of like a few years of lowering your like your rent, bills, utilities is gonna allow you to build so much more security even for your later 20s. And I speak from experience for that. Like I spent the first like I haven't lived only with my partner up until this year, and I'm 29 now, but I was 28 when that happened. So I've spent a really long time just living with other people, sharing my living space. It's not always been like the most pleasant thing, but I know that doing that has given me so much financial freedom in terms of like actual breathing room in my budget. And I think we really discount that as a generation. I really think we do, because yeah, I've met so many people who are like, I talk about that, those choices that I made in terms of like, okay, just living with the friends, either friends I didn't know or friends I did know quite well. And I always get the response of like, oh, I could never do that. Like I love my own space. But then equally the complaint of I don't have any, I've struggled on my whole 20s. I've got no savings to show for having a job, having a nice flat. And I'm like, well, it's because you decided to use your 20s to live by yourself for like 10 years, which I don't know. I just feel like it's not always necessary. But again, might be my own controversial opinion. What do you think? Because I know you've had a very different living situation to me, but I don't know if you've seen this with your friends or not.
Yeah, I've seen it kind of, but I haven't seen it be so common unless people living in London. But then I feel like people living in London, they kind of have to live with someone else. Otherwise, they can't afford the place. But then I almost think like, well, the thing is, it just depends on like the people's reasonings. Like some people really want to move out for different reasons. They don't mind sacrificing that extra money to do that because you're paying for your peace sometimes. But I feel like aside from like the bigger costs as well, I think living in moderation is also really underrated. And I don't mean like, oh, not having a coffee in the morning is gonna, make you be able to buy a property. But I think, when you get into these, especially when you're in your 20s and it's like your first full-time job and you feel like, especially if you work like a 9 to 5 or a corporate job, you feel a bit bougie. You feel like, oh, you've just got this lifestyle where you're going to go out to lunch and like you're going to work in the office and you've just got this kind of lifestyle and you just feel a certain type of way about it. And especially in the cost of living crisis now, everything is so freaking expensive. So you would actually do yourself so much more of a favor to like not. So instead of eating out like every single day of the week, if you just cut back like 3 of those days or 2 of those days, the amount that you would actually cumulatively save from doing stuff like that, because it almost becomes a habit. You're like, oh, well, I've done it once. And you don't realize like how much you're creating habits out of these things that actually end up being really expensive. So, and because you live this lifestyle and you think like you've got this nice job, you don't really pay attention to those things, but actually you can still enjoy those like little pleasures. You can still go and eat out with your friends in the evenings and things like that. But I think doing stuff in moderation will actually help, especially these days when things are so expensive. Like even eating a meal out is like triple the price it would have been a couple of years ago.
Do you know what's
so expensive?
It's so upsetting. Like Nando's is so expensive now. And that used to be like a cheap dinner out. Yeah.
Yeah. This is what I mean. But because everyone hears, oh, cost of living. Everyone hears like things are expensive, but nobody actually looks at the bill and realizes like, oh, I'm actually paying double of what I would have paid for the exact same thing maybe a year or 2 ago. Nobody's clocking that.
Yeah. I think we have in our heads that like, oh, inflation, cost of living, everything, it's not going to impact me for another 10 years. And in another 10 years, my salary will cover it.
And salaries are not covering it. I feel like salaries don't even like pass the inflation point, never mind like actually a living standard. So I think stuff like that, especially just in the time that we're in now, and I feel like it's really hard to be in your 20s where you're trying to obviously grow your income, like jobs aren't really paying that well compared to like how expensive stuff is. And I get why people want to move out and like explore in your 20s, and I think that's so valid to do, because I think it's the best time to do that. Like you're not, even if you're single, you're not settled down with anyone, like you have the freedom to explore, live in different places, like try out new cities. You don't have kids, you don't have dependents. I think that is the best time to do it. But also I feel like when you get stuck into a routine or like things are new, you almost end up letting things slide, and then you look back and realize, oh, if I actually didn't make a habit of that, like eating out every single week when the bill has literally doubled in that time I've been doing that, like if you pay attention to things like that, you can actually end up like clawing back a lot more money for your budget than you actually think you can. Because I think people, and there's a lot of like discourse around how, oh well, people are advising 20-year-olds to like cut back on their avocado and toast and that's how they're going to buy a house. And I don't think that's the case. I feel like it's unfair to say stuff like that, because it's like, well, no, houses are just that crazy expensive. Like it's kind of impossible for people to do that. But even if you don't want to buy a house, I feel like there are smaller goals, even buying a car, or I don't know, setting up a business and having an extra bit of cash to do that, is you're putting yourself in a much better situation. So it doesn't always have to be extremes, but I feel like living in moderation, I don't know, I just feel like people don't actually pay attention to that, even though now's the most important time to do that because of how expensive things are compared to people's salaries. And I think maybe the lifestyle change hasn't really, like, I guess if you have habits, then you have them, and you're not really going to look into it too much until you realize, oh,
it's too late.
Yeah, a lot of money has gone out of my account in the last year and I can't do anything about that now.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's such a good point. And like, I feel like it complements like the whole 80-20 thing really well, because like living in moderation is, okay, taking a look at like your life, your stage of life, your salary, and what you really like need to be spending money on. And like, you have plenty of time in your life to be able to like, you know, go out to eat and like use that as a convenience. But I think if you go back to even what I said about like voting with your money, if you're constantly eating out, that's you voting for convenience and you voting for not having to cook. And it's like, unless you actually want to vote for those things, you're wasting votes.
And
You
it's
know?
like short-term gains versus like long-term, you're risking like losing out or like taking longer to get to where you want to be long term just by these like very quick
Little.
and yeah, what seems like minute decisions that you're making now. But these decisions used to be minute, and I get that. It used to be the case where, oh, that money wouldn't really go that far because it's a tiny amount of money. Now I'm sure a coffee costs like £10 in some places.
Yeah.
Like, it's insane. It's not like a couple of pounds. It's not. People are keep assuming that that's the case, but you're actually paying so much more money for these little things that are adding up throughout the week. Like, you get a coffee every single day. That's 50 quid that's just left your account in the week.
Yeah. For
That's
some,
a huge amount
yeah.
of money.
And it's like, I think you have to combine that with the idea that like, okay, well, do you need to be spending that £50 on coffee? Like, that £50 is obviously not going to get you closer to like a house deposit, but it's also not going to get you closer to any other financial goals that you have. And it also doesn't allow you to then complain that you have no money, because you have to think about, well, in your 20s, you have the least amount of money that you'll ever have in your life, just based off of like your earning power and like stats and like generalizations that I'm making about where you are and what stage of life you're in. I'm obviously not counting these like amazing people who go away and start businesses and become amazing success stories, right? So when you have the least amount of money in your life, knowing that it's a season, this is just a stage. Like, you'll earn more, you will move out, you'll live in your own place, you'll have your own privacy, you'll be able to eat in whatever restaurant you want. Knowing that it's coming, how can you just make life adjustable now? And that just might mean, okay, well, how do I live in moderation? How do I do one of these things instead of doing all of them at once, because life, quote unquote, is short. And that, I'm not going to start ranting about that on this episode because I don't think we have time, but I also do think that we are obsessed with our youth. And that's, I think we've got like this deep rooted fear of like our 30s and 40s, and that really impacts our spending habits in our 20s and makes us a lot worse off, because then we don't allow ourselves to enjoy our 30s and 40s because we spend everything thinking we're going to just die at like 29.9 years old. So yeah, I'm not gonna rant about that in too much detail now. Maybe that's for another episode, but that's definitely a budget killer. But I think hopefully there were some really good takeaways in that episode. I think Farah's point of moderation is something that you can literally apply like right now. And then maybe my point on your 80-20 is something you just need to look in the mirror and be like, okay, do I need to be living soft life in my 20s? No. Well, early 20s, late 20s, fine. Work hard for it. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed listening to this episode. If you're listening to us on YouTube, don't forget to like and subscribe and leave us a comment if there's anything that you think kills budgets in your 20s. And if you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, don't forget to rate the show and follow us. And we'll catch you next week. Bye.
Bye.